The dawn of civilization. Primitive. Dangerous. Exciting. The handwriting is on the wall. If the human race is ever going to amount to anything, it needs
the most civilized caveman I have ever seen.
Look who's come out of his cave.
You're listening to the Knuckle Draggers Extravaganza on Z Digital if you're joining us live or if you're going via the magic of the internet. My name is Matt, and over the last little while, we've been playing a few tracks from this particular artist from New Zealand, but it's also got me reflecting on the fact that I'm now in a point in my life where knowing and regularly playing Dino-synth isn't that strange to me. Like even knowing Dungeon-synth in and of itself is quite strange, but then there's even more of a niche to fall down. But we're joined by Caspar from Thagomizer. First and foremost, thank you very much for taking some time out and having a chat to us.
Thanks so much for having me, it's a real pleasure, for a project that I kind of never anticipated going anywhere, getting the opportunity to speak on being actually interviewed. It's a real novelty, so we take that,
Yeah, it was one of those things where, and the deeper and deeper I get into Dungeon-synth and this kind of stuff, where it seems like regardless of what you're putting out, people in the genre and in the quote unquote scene seem to pick it up regardless of where it's from.
Yeah, for sure, Like I really did. I put out that first Thagomizer release it was almost a joke. Not quite. Like it was maybe a high effort joke, but I really did expect three of my friends to care. And then it's one of those things that if there's enough of a niche out there, people are into it, So it's really exciting.
Well, let's talk about this brand new release that you've got. It's not out via the Thagomizer realm. It's called Echoes of Extinction, Anthology 1, and it's come out through Unreal Estate Records. How did that come about? Were you approached by the guys from Unreal Estate, and have you had a chance to chat to anyone else who is a part of that sampler?
So that one came about, I think I got a message to my Bandcamp. I think it was from Primal Beast, who's obviously another artist within the Dino-synth sphere. I think he was kind of the driving force behind putting that together. I hope I've got the right artist there, because that would be really embarrassing if not. He kind of sent out the feelers to, all the artists on the compilation. And obviously he must have had his finger on the pulse with Unreal as well. So he kind of did all the networking for the project, approached me, kind of like, would you be interested in putting something out? And I'm going, that's the kind of thing that, why would you turn down? It was such an exciting little email to open up. I was like, awesome. That's such a cool excuse to, write a song or two. And then, icing on the cake was it got physically made as vinyl. Like, it's just such a cool thing.
And like you said, for a project that you thought was going to be you doing it on the side and three or four of your friends getting behind it, to have someone from overseas and a label, and that label to then go and actually give a physical pressing, it kind of comes out of nowhere.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Admittedly, Thagomizer's always been a project which has continued to exceed my expectations in every possible way. But yeah, to get the offer to get songs physically pressed, never remotely on my agenda. So yeah, such a just a pleasant surprise to ever get that,
What is the wider Dungeon-synth scene like in New Zealand? I know you're a part of Twisted Frequency. Was it earlier this year or late last year? And there was a couple of crossover, almost Dungeon-synthy kind of acts. Is it something that is growing, or is it something that you're finding that through Dino-synth and the stuff that you're doing, is it building that way? Like, talk us through what the current state of affairs is.
Um, I think it's still pretty underground as far as I know. Certainly, I wouldn't say there's a dungeon synth scene in Wellington, that's for sure. We have a pretty thriving alternate scene and some venues, which particularly one called Pyramid Club, which really focuses on kind of experimental style music. That kind of, as far as I know, that's what I would call the hub of any scene that's kind of quite out there in terms of its weirdness. But yeah, there was a guy who played before me at Twisted. I guess started this year, New Year's. I think his name was. I want to get this right as well. I think it was Necropolis, or Necropolon. I don't know. I get it wrong every time, and my girlfriend corrects me. But yeah, amazing kind of like ambient black metal meets dungeon synth. He was amazing. And that was kind of the moment playing that festival where I was like, okay, I think I'm going to be fine here, because I felt like, a real fish out of water at this, what was a lot of techno and DMB. I was like, okay, I think we're going to have it's not going to be the weirdest thing ever.
It was a bit of a surprise to you to see that kind of stuff has a place and has somewhere to go. It was a similar thing here. Like, there was a guy that I met through an interview, John from Lurid Orb. I didn't really know too much about like Australian dungeon synth, and then I reached out to him. We did an interview, and then from there, it's just all kind of unfurled in front of me. Like I was talking to you about this when we were organizing the interview, but there's a dungeon synth zine based in Melbourne called Quagmire. They've had like Questmasters come up here for a few shows. It seems like one of those things where unless you are in it and unless you're actively doing something in it, you go, there's not much really here for it,
Yeah, for sure, eh? And like, even I've kind of, since starting playing Thagomizer as a live project, I've kind of had this dream of like, I've got to find some way to make a full-on dungeon synth festival happen. And that kind of sent me down the rabbit hole. I definitely have kind of been looking in the Bandcamp tags of New Zealand and dungeon synth, and there's definitely a couple of artists out there. So I'm like, maybe one day in the future I can pull the strings or make that one happen.
How did you find going from, touching on those live shows, how did you go from playing in like hardcore and like, I'm pretty sure Cold War was one of your bands and Marrow Spawn was the other. How do you go from that especially in those genres, those very like kinetic performances, to something like Dino-synth which is very slow, methodical? What's the mindset, and is there much of a difference in performance, have you found?
I'm definitely still figuring out the live performance side of it. Definitely, and certainly when I play in those bands, I'm a guitarist, I move around a hell of a lot. And I found it quite challenging, kind of not being able to move around when playing live that same way. Because it's very much I'm in front of this little keyboard the whole time, trying my very best not to forget what I'm doing, because it's definitely not quite as intuitive to me yet. And yeah, just that it's been an interesting experience to try and figure out how to translate to a live setting in a way which doesn't feel quite so static. And it's been a really interesting process I've been trying to figure out. I don't think I've figured it out yet.
I've seen live clips and it's got you in a hoodie with the dinosaur mask. And I think that's why you see a lot of dungeon synth acts have, associated visuals like things actually set up on stage, or they've got a projector behind them, which leads me into something that I was wanting to ask. Out of the clips you do have associated with the stuff on Spotify, you've got this very stop motion-y kind of dinosaurs attacking one another from the little bits and pieces that I've seen. Where did you find those clips, and is that something that we can probably see on a live show?
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. Again, I think that's kind of, you bring in those visuals to augment the experience. and that's definitely why I didn't perform with the it's actually behind me, but I didn't perform with the mask my first couple of shows, and then I found the dude. He's Necropolis, so I did get it right, I think. But he really inspired me seeing him play at Twisted. He kind of had his like a big old black metal club or something, and he would like bring it out for these moments. Everyone would be like, yeah. And it just was like, okay, there's these ways that you can kind of, again, enhance the experience, maybe bring the audience into the kind of world that you're trying to create on stage. So that's definitely where the mask came from. And yeah, those, I can't even remember where I think I found them on YouTube. It's one of those old, stop motion movies with like cavemen and dinosaurs in it. I can't remember the specific one I took them from, but I guess there's that whole genre almost of like crash land on a planet and there's dinosaurs and now we have to like
survive.
Because I've always, yeah, exactly. And I've always kind of considered Thagomizer as inspired by retro dinosaur media. So it's kind of been this perfect melding there of these little kind of slightly janky looking dinosaurs, but it's kind of more about the mood that they create rather than any necessarily like scientific accuracy. It's more about, the overall vibe they create. And I definitely think, in the future, I would love to have some kind of projector going with, not just specifically that, but you could have some kind of looping thing there. And I think it would really add to it.
You've hit on something pretty interesting there in regards to that retro dino media. Is that the feeling and the emotion that creates in you? Is that a one-to-one link as to what you're trying to do with the environment and the atmosphere of Thagomizer?
Yeah, that's a pretty accurate summary. Like kind of trying to capture that childhood joy of dinosaurs, because I'm sure every, I feel like certainly every dude at some point in their childhood was like, I'm a dinosaur dude, right? And so, even
I had that dinosaur book with the flip where you could. Yeah.
Sure.
Every kid was a dinosaur dude.
Yeah. I was that kid that was at the library with every dinosaur book pulled off the shelf, and then I'd have to take them all home with me. So it's kind of about summoning that, childlike wonder of these, this past time. And even if those movie clips that I use, they're not specific for my childhood, but I think it's kind of this universal, like, retro appeal of it that everyone's kind of like, that's kind of charming. And, when you're a kid, that charm doesn't necessarily, matter if they're kind of goofy looking or something. You go, that's just really cool.
There is a different appeal, and I think that's why when people do find out about Dino-synth, they get so very excited by it, because with standard dungeon synth, it's a lot of like swords, sorcery, castles, ruins, and that kind of stuff. And, but it's something that I'm really into, but I feel like in a strange and a roundabout way, dinosaurs have a wider appeal.
Oh, I would agree. Like, it's almost like, when you were saying that, I kind of had the thought of like, it's almost, you've got your teenage level of nerdery, which is, swords and dragons. And then if you take that even younger.
That's it. It's like a kid level of nerds.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the same desire, but it's just from a previous era of you.
I love that framing of it. Let's get into how Thagomizer came about. And from what I've read, big thanks to Hamilton Underground Press, because they did a fantastic interview with you. And this is where I lifted this from. But it was having to repair a ligament in one of your hands was the genesis of this, which makes sense because you need two hands to play guitar. But you only need one hand to like program something on like Logic Pro or Ableton.
Scar here. Yeah, exactly. I completely severed the ligament in my middle finger, and obviously there's going to be no guitar playing for a number of months.
How did you manage to do that?
It's a weird story. Like, I was pruning a tree and I wasn't wearing gloves, but the weird thing is, like, that's not the actual serious injury. I, like, clonked myself with a pruning saw.
That's so rough.
But it was like, it was kind of like it was a little tiny cut. It was kind of fine. And then it healed fine. It was kind of stiff, but it was fine. And then a couple of weeks later, I was putting on a tablecloth. I worked at a preschool at the time. I was putting on a tablecloth, and the elastic band on the tablecloth, that was enough pressure for it just to completely sever it. It just snapped on itself. So I'm sure it would have been something equally embarrassing. But yeah, I get the dubious honor of saying I snapped my ligament putting on a tablecloth.
So was Thagomizer and actually having this project come to fruition a way of keeping yourself sane during that downtime? Or that forced downtime?
Pretty much. Again, it was always kind of I don't even know why I had Dino-synth on the brain. It was not like something that I had always wanted to do or even was like regularly listened to. I think it just kind of popped into my brain for whatever reason. I was obviously in the mood for it or something. But yeah, and then I guess I'd heard, obviously, and I joked to my Instagram friends. I was like, injured myself, Dino-synth album coming. And then I actually followed up on what was essentially a joke. And yeah, it was just a really nice change from, you get pretty burnt out writing mosh riffs all the time. So it's like, oh, it's cool. It's actually a really new, cool direction that I can just kind of experiment around in. And of course, because it was a completely new project with no expectations, it kind of gives you that really such a unique freedom when you don't actually expect anything of it. You can kind of just play around in a way that is really joyful.
And when you combine that free-form exploration and experimentation with that kid-like wonder and joy, it creates something so earnest. And yeah, it's just a really fun and sort of off-kilter thing to get into.
For sure. Yeah, and it was just such a fun little process, kind of like figuring out, what makes music sound like dinosaurs? Because, of course, that's not a question that I'd ever particularly thought about. And somehow the solution that I struck upon was brass instruments. That's kind of what obviously
I can see that, yeah. And, drop it down a few octaves and add some effects on it. I can see that.
Yeah, exactly. Because, I'd kind of been playing around, and that was the thing that really was like, oh, actually, that's a real direction there, which kind of channels what I wanted to hear, which was, I guess, essentially, I imagine like everyone's introduction to Dino-synth, I stumbled upon Diplodocus on YouTube one day, years before the hand injury even. And so I was essentially replicating my memory of what Diplodocus sounded like, but without having listened to it in a number of years. And somehow that was, again, brass instruments was what was like the sound in my brain.
I remember finding that Diplodocus record on, it's just the YouTube algorithm served it up. And I went, cool, this is about dinosaurs. This will be interesting. And then listening to it, I went, this is something that I never thought that I would have wanted to listen to, but it hit a very particular itch that I was chasing, if that makes sense.
So you just cut out there at the end a little bit. I missed what the last part of that statement was.
No, it was just that Diplodocus record hits an itch that you never knew that you had, but when it does hit that itch, you go, that's exactly what I was after.
Yeah, exactly. I felt exactly the same. It was one of those, like, I didn't know this existed. I didn't know I needed this to exist, but now I know this exists. It's exactly what I want. And I feel like a lot of the time, if you look at like the YouTube comments of any Dino-synth, I feel like almost everyone feels that exact same way. It's kind of like, I don't know how I got here, but I'm so glad I arrived at knowing that Dino-synths exist.
Exactly. I saw Mortis when they toured Australia earlier on in the year, and some guy had the Diplodocus shirt, and I'm so mad that there's only like 100, maybe 150 of those shirts available online, and they're all sold out now.
So jealous.
Oh, dude.
Honestly,
and I think that, yeah, go on.
Oh, I lost you there. I was going to say, one of my biggest regrets is I actually found that Diplodocus album on vinyl in a shop in Auckland. And at the time, I didn't have a record player. I didn't buy it. And I regret that to this day. I'm like, what was I thinking? What was I thinking that I didn't buy that? I still live in hope that maybe the next time I go to Auckland, I'm going to go to that same record shop. It's just going to be there because no one else knows what it was.
That's so, and it's one of those things where if you see that in person, the first thought is, how the fuck did this end up here?
Pretty much. I mean, it was even more so, it was just in the metal section as well. So I don't think that they knew what it was either. So it was kind of this, what? I think I was probably a little bit stunned to find it in the first place. I was like, oh, that's cool. But yeah, I messed that one up.
How have you found playing live though, and how's the reaction been? I know that you've said you've been like played in hardcore bands, been writing mosh riffs, but when you're playing at like Pyramid Club and Twisted Frequency, are people responding well to it? Are they a little bit taken aback? What's the response?
I was really impressed with the response at Twisted Frequency. Like, what was essentially my first real gig. I played a gig to 5 people in a lounge before that. I really didn't know what to expect. And, and obviously it's a little bit of a druggy festival. But they got it.
What? With that much drum and bass? No, surely not.
Never. Yeah, they figured out it was stomping music. So I had people up the front doing big stomps, and they built a nest in the hay that was on the ground, and they put their beers in it, and they were stomping around their nest, which was pretty surreal. The few moments that I was not freaking out looking up from my keyboard, it was honestly one of the weirdest but like most amazing moments of my life.
That's exactly what you want from your first real show, is people going, dinosaur music, I got to make a nest to protect my beers.
It's just, honestly, it was kind of the best thing I could have possibly asked for. I definitely found that the time I played at Pyramid, I feel like it was a little bit more confused, but it was probably, again, that's a little bit more of like a sit-down venue. It's a weird live experience. I will give it that. It feels pretty out there.
But it seems like it's been positive so far, and then sometime soon, if the project that you're embarking on happens, there'll be a New Zealand Dino-synth festival, or at least a New Zealand Dungeon Synth festival.
Oh, let's really cross those fingers, because I think there's real potential there. We need Wellington Synth Siege or something.
I know. I saw the lineup for Northeast Dungeons Siege, and there was so many good artists on there. I was lucky enough to see Questmaster when they played in Brisbane, and it blew my mind how many people showed up to that. Like, granted, it was a free show, and the venue it was like a barcade, so it was very catered to the audience. But people are showing up in full-blown cloaks. They've got their wizard hats and everything. Like you said with...
that is so cool.
Like you said with listening to Diplodocus, I feel like this kind of music people don't realize it's what they want, but when they find out that it exists, that's it. They're all in.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And even like, I reckon, Dino-synth, I think it works pretty well in the YouTube algorithm. I think, people want to click on that when they see it. But I think even like as an entryway into the broader Dungeon-synth world, I think it can even be quite a good conduit there. Because, you click on, Diplodocus, and maybe you've never listened to Dungeon-synth before, but then all of a sudden you're getting all these other weird recommendations. And maybe Diplodocus and Dungeon-synth isn't your thing, but maybe you're really into cloak and swords and dragon Dungeon-synth, and you're like, wow, I would never have found this if this little thumbnail with the sauropod hadn't popped up for me, eh?
And I feel like we said, because a lot of, particularly boys, but a lot of young people get really into dinosaurs, it can be like an easier gateway to get into, as opposed to the really self-serious, introspective and kind of morose imagery with like the cloak and sword Dungeon-synth.
I totally agree. Like, as much as like I take Thagomizer seriously, it's all still a little bit tongue in cheek. I think it would be naive to not recognize it's all a little bit ridiculous. Which is, that's kind of the fun of it.
Oh, yeah,
right?
you got to accept the ridiculousness.
This is a little bit crazy, but we're going to have some real fun with it.
And you're going to have people building nests out of hay and stomping around their beers.
Exactly. Well, where else do you get that going?
That are all the questions that I had lined up for you. Was there anything else that you wanted to bring up? And have you've got some new music in the pipeline we were talking about before we jumped on to record?
Yeah, that's probably the only other thing. I've just finally finished the second installment of my Dinosaur Drone album, which has kind of always been my, Dino-synth version of, bands like Sun or Boris. Those big, long, soundscapey style thing. It's my take on that. So I've got that coming out hopefully December 9th, I think is the date that I've set for that.
Okay,
so
we'll keep an eye out for it.
Dino Drone 2 in the pipeline.
Caspar, a big thanks for taking some time out and having a chat to us, man. We really appreciate it. If people wanted to get in touch, check out your music, keep up to date with everything that's going on in the world of Thagomizer, how would they go about doing so?
The easiest place to contact me, generally just find me on Bandcamp. I think generally I'll come up if you just search Thagomizer synths into Google. Otherwise, I am on Instagram. I post pretty infrequently, but you might get a little teaser of music there every now and then, which I think is also Thagomizer_synths, I think is it. But you should be able to find me there as well. That's probably the place if you want to see any little sneak peeks.
Perfect. We'll put all those details in the show notes. But yeah, again, thanks for taking some time out and having a chat to us, man. I really appreciate it.
Beautiful. Thanks so much for having me on. It's like, again, like I said, never counted on any of this, so it's such an exciting time to just go, cool, I'll totally do an interview, have a chat about dinosaurs. It's a good time.